Most jazz beginners think you need to memorize thousands of chord grips to play jazz, but that's just not true. I struggled with this as well until I discovered how pros simplify everything to easy 3-note chords. And suddenly, comping, even chord soloing, became about making music, not remembering thousands of chords. So in this video, I'm gonna show you exactly which 3-note chords the pros use so that you can play colorful jazz chords and even create flowing chord solos like Joe Pass without memorizing endless amounts of grips. Let's get one thing straight. The real goal in jazz isn't to see who can remember the most chords. It is to make music. Joe Pass, one of the greatest jazz guitarists ever, said it best.
The object in playing guitar, solo, melodies is to make music and not to make hard work. I mean, you want to be free to be able to play and not to be free to try to see how hard you could make it.
That is exactly what this approach is about. Instead of drowning in a sea of complicated chord shapes, focus on a handful of simple voicings. Here's the secret. Almost every difficult chord that you see is just a variation of a simple one. Think of chords like words. If you can learn the word play, you can easily understand plays, playing, or played. They're just variations, not new words altogether. Chords work the same way. Once you know the basic form, the rest are just tweaks. But before we get into that, let's lay the foundation you'll need. Let's get practical. We'll take those simple chords and turn them into something that you can actually use to improvise and comp with. No theory degree required. Here's a very simple C7, and to get the basic sound of the chord, you only need 3 notes. And that will be the root, the third, and the 7th. But for this to be practical, you want to know them in 2 different ways. So you have this one with the bass on the 6th string and then the 3rd and the 7th on the middle strings, plus the version where the bass is on the 5th string and again the chord is on the middle string set. Along the way, you'll see how splitting up the guitar in 3 groups of 2 strings is incredibly powerful. It really is magic on the guitar. These are simple, minimalistic chords, but even before we start adding notes or taking notes away, they are useful for comping, especially if you occasionally borrow a neighbor chord or fret away, or use the built-in rhythm, which is also sort of a bonus. You could look at the B7 that I'm using as a passing chord and then try to analyze it with some theory, but it really is just a chord to get back to the C7. Now, the built-in rhythm comes from splitting the chord in bass and chord, which naturally makes it possible to do some great things with the rhythm. So let's start with this simple voicing. Next, I'm going to show you how to add notes and build a complete flexible system for comping and chord soloing. 99% of the time, teachers make a mistake with teaching jazz chords on guitar. I'm going to show you what that is and how to fix it in a bit. But first, here's how Joe Pass thinks about melody and comping.
And you're actually supposed to be creating kind of a little melodic chordal movement yourself. I mean, it's not just I'll play these chords and wait until it's my solo.
So your chords need to become a melody, and for that we need more options as top notes. Now, how do we make a C7 melodic? Here it's actually pretty simple. Just add notes on the B string. First you have the basic shell voicing, but adding the notes on the B string, you also have the 5th G, the 13th A, and the flat 7 B flat as melody notes as well. But it gets even better. You can split these chords up, dig into the groove, and use those added notes as melody lines. And I'm using another trick here that is especially useful for dominant chords and a little bit bluesy. First you have the split shell voicing, just to get the groove across. And then I'm also adding the 13th and the 5th as melody notes. Now in the second bar you get that bluesy passing note, which is first like a D sharp and then moving up to the E. So that's already in the chord, but it just works as sort of an extra bluesy thing that you can add in there. And then again you get this as a response to it. So now when you think of C7 as the basic shell voicing, you also have these variations of it already in there, and we can add even more options. But before we go further, let me show you the big problem with most jazz chord lessons. Here's a huge mistake, thinking you have to stick to just one type of chord voicing, like drop 2 or shell voicings or something else all the time. That's not how music or real jazz playing works. Music works like this. And here I'm using a lot of different voicings. First, just the basic shell, then a drop 3, another drop 3, and then moving into a triad. And then here we get 2 drop 2 voicings. And this is all in one short phrase. So if you only practice one type of voicing in isolation, you're missing the point, because in music they're supposed to be mixed. Jazz chords are like cooking. You don't learn by only studying ingredients. You also need to learn how to mix them and turn them into a meal. Now, of course, it makes sense to work on types of voicings, but you also want to be aware of how they fit together and are used in real music. Check out this phrase from Joe Pass' chord solo on a B-flat blues. Keep in mind that this is a single phrase, and again you have two triad voicings. These two, then some single notes, followed by some drop 2, and finally a triad. This doesn't mean you shouldn't learn drop 2 or drop 3, but it is essential to learn to mix different types of voicings when you play. Another thing you want to notice from this Joe Pass phrase is this: he's not playing any bass notes. He focuses on rootless voicings. Let me show you why that is so useful. Here's something a lot of guitarists miss. Just because you can play the root doesn't mean that you always should, especially if you're playing with a bass player. Until now you've been thinking about chords by finding the root, and that's great for orientation, but in a real band you don't want to crowd the bass register. Instead, use the root as an anchor point to find your spot on the neck and then focus on playing rootless chords, just like Joe Pass did. Now let's add even more melodic options to your toolkit. And this is easier than you think. Just add the available notes on the high E string. These work especially well when you leave out the root, and they help you easily link shell voicings to drop 2 and drop 3 voicings. You have the shell voicing, then you have the rootless shell, 3-note versions of C7, C7 13, and also the other C7 here. Then you get the 4-note drop 2 voicings, which is this one and this one, plus an extra slightly stretchy version of the C7 13, which is just really practical for some of the melodies that we play. With all these shapes, you can create phrases like this that are more like chord solos, maybe a bit busy for comping, but also perfect for showing what is possible. And look at how many different chords you now have tied to that single shell voicing. Instead of memorizing 20 separate grips, you're seeing C7 as a whole menu of options in this part of the neck. That's a massive shift in how you think about chords. But so far we've only talked about one type of shell voicing, the one with the root on the 6th string. There's also a shell voicing with the root on the 5th string. Now that you know the process, working through this is a lot easier. So let's use F7 as an example and see how this all fits into a jazz blues. The other essential shell voicing, F7 with the root on the 5th string, becomes this set of options. Start with the basic F7 shell voicing. Here you can add 3 notes on the B string, so F, G and A, root, 9th and 3rd. And of course, these are also often practical as rootless voicings because that's a little bit easier to play. Now the next level of this is to add the notes on the E string, and again focusing on the rootless versions first because they're a bit easier to play, but you could actually play them with the root as well. So here you get the C, the 5th, the D, the 13th, and an E flat. Adding these E string notes connects you to the drop 2 voicings, so you are again naturally linking different voicing types without having to memorize them separately. And with all these options, you can create something like this. So what started as a single F7 chord has now become a whole range of sounds that you can use for comping and chord soloing. And with both C7 and F7 available in the same area of the neck, you're ready to start creating real jazz blues phrases. Let me show you how to put it all together. Now that you've got these open sets for C7 and F7, you'll find it so much easier to play phrases that flow beautifully across the bars. Take a listen to this. Notice how the melody flows from one chord to the next across the bar line. That is the real magic that this approach unlocks. In this example, I also slipped in a chromatic passing chord to move from F7 back to the C7. Don't worry, I'll show you the trick to using those in a bit. But first, let's talk about how you can practice these voicings to really get them under your fingers. Here are 2 simple exercises designed to help you connect these voicings and reinforce the shell voicing as your anchor point. For C7, start with the shell voicing and then play the other melody notes, almost like a scale, since most melodies move stepwise when you're comping. I know I put it in the diagrams as well in the sheet music, but you probably want to just focus on the shell voicing and what changes. For F7, you get this. Another thing that you can easily add to your comping and chord solos is chromatic passing chords, but you need one thing to make it work. Let's look at that. A lot of students get intimidated by chromatic passing chords. They expect some kind of heavy music theory with complicated names and rules, but the good news is that is not how it works at all. It's much simpler, and in fact it's pretty visual. The secret to making them work is something Joe Pass talked about earlier in this video. The melody. The one thing that you need to get right that will fix any chromatic passing chord is a logical melody. So start there. For the C7, if you have a melody like this, which has 2 chromatic passing notes, the trick is to really just think about where you're going. So in this melody, I have 2 chromatic passing notes. I have the D sharp that moves up to the E, and then I have the A flat that moves down to the G. And of course, if I look at the D sharp to E, now this E, I would probably use this shell voicing, and that means that on the D sharp, I just want to use the same voicing because then it just slides right into place. And I can use that on the A flat as well. So now here I would probably use this C7, and that means that of course I would use this on the A flat. I'm not really thinking about the chord, I'm just thinking about where they're going and looking at the note that they resolve to. And now you have this harmonized phrase. If you want to make real progress with jazz guitar, it's not just what to practice, but how you practice. And that is something jazz legends like Wes Montgomery, Joe Pass, and John Scofield all agree on. In this next video, I'll show you their practice habits and exercises so that you can stop wasting time and start improving every single day. Check it out, learn jazz, make music.